The first night was the hardest. Not because of the cold, though it seeped through her thin jacket like a blade, or the hunger that clawed at her stomach. It was the silence between trains, between footsteps, between hope. Nora sat alone on the stone bench outside the station, her knees hugged to her chest, the flicker of a street lamp blinking overhead like a tired eye refusing to sleep. She hadn't planned this. She didn't even know she'd end up here. But when her stepfather slammed the door and said, "You're 18, figure it out," she had nowhere else to turn. And now, here she was, figuring it out, hour by hour. The second night taught her something else, how invisible you could become. Hundreds of faces passed her by. Suits with headphones, tourists with rolling bags, a little boy with a balloon who stared for a moment before his mother gently turned his head. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody stopped. She tried to ask a woman in a business coat what time the waiting room reopened. The woman clutched her purse and sped off. Nora didn't blame her. She could smell herself, feel the grime on her skin, hear the tremble in her own voice. That night she pulled her hood down low and counted the trains that came and went, whispering destinations she'd never see. Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles. Each one felt like a door swinging open for someone else. On the third morning, a police officer approached, not to arrest her, not to ask if she needed help. He just said, "You can't sleep here." Nora nodded. She stood. She walked 2 blocks to the convenience store, used the restroom to wash her face, and drank tap water from her hands. She spent that day in the library pretending to read, notebooks in her lap, scribbling nothing but lines, just so the staff wouldn't ask questions. She had 2.17 left in her pocket. She was saving it. For what? She didn't know. The third night felt different. The wind had picked up. A storm was pushing through. Her body was tired in a way that felt dangerous, like it might simply stop trying. That night, when she curled against the corner of the building near the trash bins, she cried without sound. Then came the boots. She heard them before she saw him. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching against the gravel outside the station. She tried not to look. People walking by never meant help, but the boots stopped. A shadow lingered. Then a voice, soft but certain. "Darlin', you got someone coming for you?" Nora looked up slowly. He was tall, older than her, but not old. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face. His jeans were dusty, and he held a paper coffee cup in one hand, a worn leather bag in the other. She shook her head. No words came, just the truth in her eyes. He didn't offer her pity, didn't pretend to know her pain. He just crouched down beside her and placed the coffee cup near her side. "It ain't much, but it's warm." He stood again and added, almost under his breath, "Nobody should be alone out here like this." Then he walked away. She stared after him until the shadows swallowed him whole. She held the cup. It was still hot. That night she didn't feel warm, but she didn't feel invisible either. The next morning she was still sitting in the same spot when the boots returned. The cowboy stood in front of her again. Same hat, same quiet presence. He offered a small paper bag. "There's a sandwich in there, real simple, ham and cheese." Nora hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I saw a storm in you, but storms pass." She didn't know why, but those words cracked something open in her chest. As the sun climbed higher, he sat beside her on the edge of the concrete wall, careful not to crowd her. "Name's Elias," he said. "I've seen tough years myself. Got a ranch out in Wyoming. Quiet place, good land. I'm headed back." Nora listened, still silent. "Ain't saying I got all the answers, but if you ever want work, or just a place to breathe, you could come along." She blinked. Surely this was a dream, or some kind of test. But Elias didn't push. He just stood, adjusted his hat, and said, "Think about it." Then, like before, he disappeared down the street, lost in the light. Nora sat with the sandwich untouched in her lap. A job? A place to breathe? The offer sounded unreal. People didn't do that. Not anymore. Not for strangers. Her whole life had been a parade of locked doors, backhands, and silent meals. The idea of someone simply offering safety felt foreign, almost dangerous in itself. But there was something in Elias's eyes, not the look of someone trying to rescue her, more like someone who saw a reflection of himself. And maybe, just maybe, she was tired of saying no to life. That evening, she waited in the same spot. She didn't know if he'd return, but a small part of her hoped, and he did. Right as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Elias walked up with 2 coffees this time. He handed her one. "Still warm," he said. Nora held it in both hands. "Why me?" she finally asked. Her voice cracked. "You don't know me." Elias looked ahead toward the tracks. "I don't need to know every chapter to recognize someone worth the next one." Then he reached into his jacket and handed her a bus ticket. "Leaves in an hour. I'll meet you on the other end." She stood frozen as he walked away once more. This time, he didn't look back. The ticket felt heavy in her palm, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. It meant trust. It meant choice. It meant she had a say in her future for the first time in her life. Nora stared at the station clock, then at her ragged sneakers, then at the stars beginning to prick the sky. She exhaled slowly and walked inside. The bus ride was quiet. She stared out the window, watching the world blur by, each town a flicker, each billboard a fading memory. For the first time in days, she slept. When she awoke, Wyoming stretched before her like a postcard come to life. Elias stood by his pickup truck, arms crossed, same hat, same calm. "You made it," he said. Nora nodded. No words, just a breath that didn't tremble. Life on the ranch wasn't a fairy tale. It was work, real, hard work. She mucked stalls, fed horses, learned to fix fences and mend clothes, but each day gave her something she'd never had before: peace. At night, she sat on the porch with Elias, drinking tea in silence, the stars overhead like guardians. He never asked questions she didn't want to answer, never pushed her to become someone else. He just let her be. And little by little, she began to heal. One night, as they sat watching the moon rise over the fields, Elias turned to her. "You've come far, Nora." She looked at him, unsure what to say. He added gently, "I don't want to make assumptions, but if you ever want to stay, long term, I reckon I wouldn't mind sharing this place." Her throat tightened. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that didn't hurt. And then, in the softest voice, he whispered the words she never thought she'd hear in her life. "You're mine now." Not in the way people take, but in the way people choose. The lesson in Nora's journey wasn't about being rescued. It was about recognizing when to trust, when to say yes to something good after a lifetime of pain. It taught her, and anyone who hears her story, that hope doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in dusty boots with a warm drink and a quiet promise. And if you're brave enough to say yes, it might just change your life forever.